Your B2B Marketing Pint is the podcast for B2B technology marketers who want to sharpen their competitive edge. Joined by other marketing veterans, your hosts Brian O'Grady and Brendan Ziolo share expertise on what works today and why. Grab a cold pint of hot takes on branding, content marketing, demand generation, and more, served with a side of sarcasm.
All right, Brendan, what's in your glass today?
Well, today, to support the non-drinkers in our audience, I actually have a Guinness, but it's the non-alcohol version. Very tasty, I might add, and I still am challenged a few people to tell the difference between one with and one without alcohol. So if anyone wants to take me up on that offer, I'll meet you at a bar at some date and time. What are you drinking today, Brian?
Well, I'm not against your option by any stretch of the imagination as an O'Grady. There'd be a problem if I were against it. However, today I've got an IPA from Partake Brewery out of Toronto, which is actually, by coincidence, also zero alcohol. That's just because I may have to give a blood test tomorrow. You know what I mean? So that's what I'm into, and so far so good. I'm enjoying it. I think an IPA is a tough one to replicate. It's zero alcohol, but this one's pretty good. But more importantly than my drink, we have a special guest joining us today. He's that third fellow on your screen. That's Mr. John Blackmore, and we've sent Mr. Blackmore something as well. John, what's in your glass?
Sure. And thank you very much for the gift that you did send. And you're kind of shaming me because I do have like full-on alcohol beer here. So, but I think I'm trying to be a little bit more of a Canadian. So today I've got Dominion City, which is a great Ottawa brewery. And so we got the Maple Leafs there. And also this is their beer called Bonspiel. So another great Canadian piece there in terms of beer based on curling. And it's a brown lager. And it's a great little beer.
Well, now that we've got the most important part of the podcast out of the way, what we're drinking today, Brian, why don't you introduce John? The two of you go way back, and let's see, learn a bit more about him and understand why we invited him on the podcast and what he's going to talk about today.
I'd love to. And John, I'll throw you the mic after this to correct the record where I've gone wrong. But John and I do go back a long time. I think it's fair to say, John, we're longtime colleagues, friends. And in fact, you were my boss on multiple occasions on different digital marketing teams in places large and small, places like IBM, some listeners may have heard of, other places like GFI Software, and more recently, Field Effect Software. And I know through personal experience that John brings a wealth of B2B tech experience to this podcast and the table in general. And more interestingly, I think, John, you bring a philosophical bent to marketing that's definitely helped me over the years. And I think it'll help others as well who listen today. And it helps by allowing all of us to better conceptualize the role of a modern marketer. Outside of that, I don't want to steal the thunder of the conversation. So I'll say outside of working in tech and marketing, John is a son of Newfoundland, and John is also an accomplished creative writer. There's a chance I have a book of John's poetry around here somewhere.
Very good. Yeah, hopefully you do. And if not, we can definitely. There's a number of those in a box somewhere that I can send to you. So that'd be great. Yeah, no, that's right. Brian and I have worked, my gosh, it's well over 2 decades, which is scary. Cognos, I guess, was our first experience together, which was a great run we had there, discovering the wild, wild west days of when paid search began. I see your Google partners in back there, back in the day when AdWords was just beginning. So yeah, we've had lots of wild and woolly experiences both here in Canada and lots over in China and Japan and some other farther afield. So yeah, it's great to be here and great to talk about it. I think, when you mentioned philosophy, I think, working with you, Brian, and then the collection of band of merry people that we had both at Cognos and IBM, really smart people. And you could pretty much any moment pitch a weird idea and somebody would take it and start running with it and adding to it. And I'd say that's probably where part of this philosophy idea and ability just to really talk about strange concepts when it comes to marketing or business really arose. We had a lot of intelligent people around us, and we had a lot of people who were always interested in asking, strange questions and the why. So yeah, we've had a fun ride so far.
I
So
agree.
I'm very intrigued as I don't often hear the word philosophy, John, applied to marketing as a general rule, and I'm sure there's a whole lot for us to discuss here. But why don't you take us through what you see as those three essential talents for a marketer? And I know you've written an article about this as well, so obviously we'll post that in the show notes so people can read that as well. But kind of walk us through the idea as a starting point here so the audience knows where you're coming from.
Sure. No, thanks, Brendan. So the idea is that, Brian and, Brendan, we've been in marketing for a number of decades, and we've worked with a lot of really amazing marketers. And so when I just took a step back and started to think about what I've done, what, you've done, what we've done together, and some of these other people, I kind of see, if you can imagine in your head like a triangle. I can do a triangle well here. At each of the apex of the angles of the triangle, there's sort of like three talents. And the interesting thing that, when I think about it and the people that we've had the opportunity to work with, it's challenging for anybody to have all three talents, but we all know people who've had at least one or, in better way, two of those talents. So if you think of those three angles, one of them I would say is the talent of being a storyteller. The other one is to be a mathematician, and the third is to be a psychologist. So I find that expertise, talents, and thinking in each of those sort of zones are critical pieces to making a successful marketer and successful marketing activities.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And based on my experience, people have very different levels on each of those three skill sets. Some people are very, very strong on one; others are more balanced. That's pretty rare, I think, to have all three. So here's a question based on that. Then, for someone who's strong in one area, let's say you're strong in the storytelling. I like to think I'm strong in the storytelling one. How could you start developing an area? The other two, for example, are where you're weaker.
Sure, it's a great question. I mean, I think one of the first things is, and when I'm thinking about this particular approach, just being aware that there are different talents, because often we get blinded by what we do well, and we think that's the way the universe operates. So probably like you, I might have considered myself more of a storyteller, but I was lucky as well, and especially if you think of our climate when we were at Cognos, it was really at the beginning days of us doing a lot better measurements. We had a lot better marketing metrics really just kind of coming on stream. And I think also, if you think about it, our experience has been very strongly in the digital marketing space, which, back in the day was kind of a new thing. Obviously, it's not very new anymore, but it was a new discipline, and it was usually assigned to the miscreants and the misfits in the organization, because the real marquee people did the events, and then there's the rest of us mopping up this web thing because it's just an annoyance. Now, the wonderful thing about the web is it's completely measurable. Everything you're doing leaves some kind of trail, some kind of trace. And we were starting off with that, and we were getting all of these numbers. So back to your question, what happened, I think, for us, we might have both been storytellers, but then we were face to face with all of these measurements. And then what you do is essentially you can use the measurements to test your ability of what is your story working well or not. And to take a step back, so storytelling sounds like, it's like somebody spinning a yarn, but which can be, it can be like creating these amazing commercials or things. But if you really think about it at its heart, storytelling comes down to, in a lot of ways, like word choice. And if I think of one of our experiences together, Brian, if I think of word choice and the sort of this combination of using math, and then really with the math, the storytelling, getting at the headspace or the psychology of a colleague or of a customer. So I remember one of our first experiments that we did, or one of our first eureka moments, we had a website, Cognos website. We like to talk about ourselves like everybody else does on the web, talk about our latest press release or latest announcement or what have you. But we started to discover, because we bought this tool that allowed us to see where do people click. And funnily enough, the one word reporting, which used to be down in the bottom of the website below the fold, is down in that sort of Weasley area where you put all your SEO terms. It was like number 2 or 3 of all of the clicks happening on the website. And I thought that was like weird because, we had all this stuff up above that we were trying to shout at people. That's the story we were telling, but all the people were down kind of clicking on the reporting. So then we sort of moved it up and then, moved it around on the page. People kept finding it. People kept clicking on it until eventually we said, hey, what if we make it like a big ass button right on the page, reporting? And bingo, everybody started clicking on it. And I'd say in a way, I don't think I articulated this sort of philosophy of psychologist, mathematician, and storyteller back in that day. But I'd say that's probably like the genesis of where this idea comes from, because we were telling a story using a word that really connected with what the person wanted. So we're trying to get into the headspace of our visitor. And again, that's another thing we used to do in web. They're visitors. They're not traffic. They're visitors. They're people coming into my house, coming into my digital home, and they're looking for reporting. And we saw that through the metrics, through the math. And I'd say that's probably like a really good example of how you use, storytelling, math, and psychology all sort of working together to provide those better experiences for your customers.
Yeah. So I think, John, the storytelling and math side, that makes sense and was definitely not what jumped out at me. It was that psychology part. When I read the article first time, I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Like the first two were pretty clear what you mean. And you've touched a bit on that in your example and stuff like that. And I think you've got some other examples in the article as well, if I recall. But, if I think of the marketers I know, there's definitely some that are, in the data, love the analysis. There's some that are great at storytelling. I'm going to guess that most would struggle more with the psychology part. Maybe that's not your experience, but it's definitely mine. Could you kind of let us know how you think someone can build that skill set, maybe tap into that part of the triangle and really improve their overall approach, whether they're a storyteller or math by trade? I'm just thinking psychology is the one that most probably need to explore more.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. I mean, I've always considered that definitely my weakest element of the three. Not that the other two are spectacular, but definitely psych. And it was really brought home to me, like my youngest daughter is studying psychology. She did a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and now she'll be doing a PhD in psychology. And she illuminates so much about psychology for me that I had, no idea. I'd never studied it really. And I think it's probably one of the most important things for not just marketers, but almost anybody on the planet to get a sense of the guidebook of how our minds are operating. A couple of things that I think were my inroads into it. We used to have a conversation when we were doing, for example, designing web pages, the idea of cognitive dissonance. Flip back. I remember this. I had this conversation with my daughter once. I was driving her back to Queen's University from Ottawa, and I asked her, what would be like a Nobel Prize in psychology? Because I had studied other sciences, the hard sciences, when I was in university, and there's Nobel Prizes for that. There isn't one for psychology. So I was kind of throwing it out to her, almost in a way like what would she say? And she rattled off all of these different topics that could have been or should have been really Nobel Prizes. And one of them that she did mention was cognitive dissonance. So back to that, one of the things that we often do as marketers, or you've probably all experienced, marketers get into marketing speak, or people who maybe are not marketers, they start to try to write like a marketer, where, we're the world leading blank, or we're optimizing high efficiency networks 24/7, just kind of just blah stuff. And all of those terms that are not really, I can't really back them up easily, those introduce cognitive dissonance in any of the readers, because they're forced to take a step back and say, well, really? Or says who? Can I trust this? And so that's just an example of us, kind of accessing some of these ideas about psychology as we're marketers, is making sure that we're not committing any sort of like psychological flaws or psychological errors. But I think, a lot of it comes back to, again, really trying to understand and think like your customers. And, there's two real, textbooks that I've sort of picked up on since, discussing this through with my daughter. There's a really great book, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And there's another one that I picked up just recently, kind of goes another step further. It's a little bit deeper and a bit denser, but it's I think it's called The Enigma of Reason. And basically what they both come back to is, as humans, we're extremely irrational. We think we're rational and we think we use reason, but we don't. So that almost, just that sort of like very basic insight, um, along with a couple of other psychological insights, can arm a marketer to be a far stronger marketer by just giving you sort of like the fundamentals or foundations of some approach to good psychology.
That's a cool example. And you've triggered an anecdote for me that I'm sure will be corrected in the comments later if I get my psychology wrong. But your point about how we make decisions, what I heard years ago, and I've tried to keep with me since, how we make decisions as a creature is first we make a choice. And they can see this apparently by seeing the parts of our brain light up in order. First we make a choice. And then the rationalization center in our brain lights up to justify that choice.
Yeah.
Apparently, what differentiates some great leaders from average people is after they've done that, they send it back in to be reprocessed as a choice again. And apparently that's what one of the differentiators is among good decisions and otherwise just emotional, irrational insanity. I do have another question for you, though, and I think you touched on it because you've mentioned the storytelling and you've mentioned the math and that potentially the gap you want filled for you is psychology. But I'm going to out you a little bit for our audience. If I remember correctly, you've got a background, an unusual background, which I think makes you kind of a bilingual marketer. If I remember correctly, you've got a background in both journalism and physics from an education perspective. Are they the two disciplines that brought you to this idea, or do they influence how you operate as a marketer?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's funny. So you're correct. I did complete a physics degree first when I was in university. And full disclosure, I'd be probably the world's worst physicist. So I don't think CERN or NASA will be picking up my chit anytime soon. But massive impact on the way I think and the way I approach, which is really all university is, right? It's just a mode of thinking. And I'd say what I pulled from that is I incessantly build models. So, classic, marketer thing is funnels, right? So I absolutely love the funnel and I, diagram out a lot of the pieces of the funnel. The other thing though, with physics, physics operates in a very idealized world. So I'm not going to, nth degree everything. We'll sort of round it and just come up with a model of basically how things are operating. And then that's your hypothesis. And then you watch what people do. And so that's probably where you kind of then start to infer the psychology of it. But yeah, I'm a big believer in taking that approach, which then just gives you sort of like that very basic math. Like actually, I was just chatting through with my CMO just the other day. We're sort of going back and forth on our model. I built a model based on target. She based a model on budget, and we met in the middle, and they actually both aligned, which was like a wonderful thing. So yeah, it's a critical piece of it. I think that that concept though of like measurement and experimentation, if I can just riff on that for a moment. One of the things that, again, we did together, Brian, as digital marketers, we stopped and we actually conducted, surveys where we asked the people who are coming to our website, what are you trying to do here? And I think if anything, there's a lot we can get onto about the philosophy of the triangle and the storyteller, psychologist, and mathematician. I think the really important thing is just taking that step back and thinking about it in that way. So you're trying to think about, what am I trying to do? And then that forces you, or hopefully drives you, I guess, into some actions. So for us, it was trying to get into the headspace of, what are these people doing when they come to our website? And, some of those things, back to like some very basic psychological concepts. There's the great line by, I think it's Jakob Nielsen, where the web visitor is lazy, selfish, and ruthless. And, I think that expresses, as you talked about, we're not really rational creatures. We're quite irrational. So we're driven by what we're driven by. And that's really all we can see. So the more that we as marketers are aware of that, not to pander to the crowd, but to be aware. So people aren't, waking up every morning looking for our message or looking for what our feature functionality is that we might try to tell them on the website. We have to get in and think about what their needs are, what are their drives, what are their ambitions. And the more that we can link up with what we're offering with that need, the better success our stories will have. And then we'll see that in terms like the models, in terms of the metrics that come out the other end.
If I remember correctly, when Brian walked through some of your bio at the start, there was a mix of smaller and larger companies that you've worked with. So I was just curious if you saw these three skill sets being different or different emphasis or different mix, kind of, the startup versus the more established enterprise versus maybe, the global behemoths, if any of those fit. I guess you worked at IBM, so it does fit. But yeah, is there any difference there, or do you not think the company, the size, the industry, or anything like that really matters here?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I would say that again, the big value is one is it's just thinking, right? My poor kids, we used to early on when we were driving the car, used to we'd have conversations. One of the things I used to say was that it's the Socratic concept of the unobserved life is not worth leading. And they were 7 at the time, and I think they appreciate that whole story. But they come back and told me that, okay, I remember that, Dad. So, the whole thing with the triangle is it does, it makes you question what you're doing and why are you doing it and what results do you think and what's really happening here? Because a lot of times, if you think about it, in both small and big, like small companies especially, we end up juggling a lot of different plates. And we were often just like hell-bent for leather doing stuff. But sometimes you do need to take that step back. It's not quite related to the triangle, but it's a little bit more like that idea of stepping back. One of the things that I've tried to do as I've worked at different size companies is, what is my overall, my Uber marketing strategy or philosophy? So for example, Brian and I both worked at a company. He had mentioned that was a smaller company and it was a little bit of a hardscrabble little company. And I would say that our attitude was that we were marketers like we were pirates. So we were going to go off and we would have the eye patches and we're just going to do whatever needed to get done. And, we were a little bit more guerrilla warfare like that. At IBM, the concept was I'm a colossus and I can crush anything that I want to. If I focus on it, we can crush it. I mean, we had our own, URL string, like you got your own IP address as IBM. So for example, we went out and we decided SEO wise, whatever we wanted to win, we would go out and win. And lo and behold, we did. We could create pages based on a term and just crush it because nobody could stop me. Similarly with paid search at IBM, like if I want to spend the money on it, you can't stop me. So the company I'm at today, we're getting back into the smaller world. So the basic philosophy there is I lose every game I don't get invited to. So my marketing strategy is very much about finding the signals of intent and then inserting myself into conversations. So it's a little bit like I'm an interrupter. It's like, oh, you haven't heard of me, but, so I think, again, it's like there's like an Uber philosophy of the approach. And then you go back to looking at, your measurement and your storytelling, how that reflects and supports that particular approach to your overall marketing strategy.
Cool insight. I think you may have just alluded to or referenced a rather famous Gretzky quote, which is often misattributed to the great one himself, to Wayne Gretzky. I think it's actually from his father, Walter. And if I remember it correctly, it's you miss 100% of the shots you do not take. And by coincidence, if people couldn't tell, this was a Canadian-based podcast. They do now because we're talking about hockey. I know you have some strong opinions on that as well, John, but we'll save that for another episode.
Yeah. I've used that one, actually, that quote, when we were talking about back. So I've been here now for 2 years. So back in the early parts of 2023, that was the concept, right? Like, again, we lose every game, we miss every shot. And small companies especially, right? We don't get invited to the games. So we've got to find a way to, get into those conversations. And that's part of our, you use the psych, use the math, use the storytelling to get yourself into those conversations.
Cool. I'm going to dive in with one more, Brendan, because I can tell you're on the edge of your seat with more. But to make this more applicable, or to take it out of theory land and to make it a bit more applied for folks who are saying, "Hey, sounds great. Now, how do I do it, or how would I do it? How would I put this to work?" In your article on the 3 talents of a marketer, you give a couple of examples of brands everybody knows, and some I like, Apple and Dyson in particular. And they might be pretty good examples of brands that are playing with psychology at a high level. So my question for you, based on that in the article, is if you're a B2B marketer, and this is the B2B Marketing Pint, we're all B2B marketing folks here, and I imagine most of the audience is too, or somebody who's straight in looking for beer information. But anyway, if you're a B2B marketer, using Apple and Dyson as examples, how could they tap into sort of an emotional depth for what they're marketing without, considering these are big businesses, these are conceivably boring brands as well. So when you're trying to apply emotional depth to something that's big business, you could go astray. How do you do that as a B2B marketer without just falling into cliches or using overused catchphrases in an attempt to connect with your audience? How do you get a depth of psychology happening in a situation like that?
Yeah, it's a good question. And if you think about it, I often think about marketing there's like 2 big sides of it. There's like brand marketing and DG marketing. And B2B, in my world of B2B, I've been far more on the DG side of it. I would say that, with the consumer, the brand and the psychology and the emotional piece of it is far more important, because one of the things that we deal with often in B2B, it's usually not a single decision maker, right? There's like a buying committee. So you've already got multiple candidates who you're going to have to try to understand the psychology. So really you're almost like trying to psychoanalyze a business or a company, right? So I think one of the things is understanding, the emotional benefits that your product can bring beyond just solving particular business pains, right? So just as an example, for our company today, so Field Effect, where I work, so we're a cybersecurity vendor. So what are we selling? So, I mean, some of my competitors are selling absence of fear. So they really trade on, scariness. If you think of a lot of brands in cybersecurity, there's, the faceless hoodie. There's often like mythological beasts. There's grand, creatures that are coming to get you. They're all of the viruses, etc. Everything about it, like, as a threat. It's a very scary world. The one thing that we looked at, in a sort of an emotional or psychological side of things, is what we want to sell you is actually peace of mind. And because, like, in some ways, I mean, cybersecurity is, it's a bit of a pain to have to spend money on it because it's not core to my business. I just want to operate, Bob's Bagels, make nice sandwiches for people. But because I'm taking in, maybe I've got like a membership thingy. So if you get 5 bagels, you get a 6th one free. So I got your customer data. If I lose that customer data or it gets hacked, my business is defunct. I could go out of business tomorrow because of cybersecurity, not because I did bad bagels. So what we want to be able to offer to you, again, is that peace of mind so that you can just go do your job. You do your job, we'll do our job. Let's not focus on all the scariness. Let's just focus on, I want to let you sleep at night. So then what you have to try to decide is, how do I imbue that kind of story into, the messaging? But at the same time, you have to be able to give what people are looking for. Like, again, if I think on the DG side, or, I referenced, we looked at what people wanted from our website or our web traffic. And we found out, those lazy, selfish, ruthless visitors, they want to know, what does the product do? What are its what does the product do? Its features and benefits. Show me how it works. Tell me how much it costs. So those are the three things. So balancing maybe your overall emotional appeal that you might want to have, at the same time, if I can give you exactly what you're looking for when you come visit me, you may not realize it, but you're having a strong brand experience because you come to me, you interact with me, and you don't leave with your head scratched. Like you're just like, okay, I get what this thing is now. So I think in the B2B side, if we're thinking a little bit on what is the emotional value of your product to a company, and try to think about that company as as an entity, as a person, and then at the same time also imagine what it is the individuals of that company, when they come and start interacting with you and serving those things up. Like I've always said, a good web experience is a strong brand experience. And sometimes we do such wacky things on a website that to, disincent people from actually interacting with us, because we're not really seeing them as real people who are coming through. So I guess that'd be my sort of like two takes on that when it comes to B2B and using the triangle idea.
So before we wrap up, John, maybe one final question, just to kind of put a bow on it, or a shamrock on top of my Guinness, depending on the analogy here. If you had to just pick one of these talents, which would it be and why?
Yeah. Oh, I was afraid you were going to ask that.
That's why we left it till the end.
Okay, I'll go with like my first thought on it is probably going, I don't know. Okay, I was going to say math. And that probably reflects where I come from. But I think that idea of measuring and experimenting, just that headspace is going to serve you well, because you're never really satisfied. Like, you asked about the difference working for small companies and big companies. Sometimes you'll find in big companies there'll be a hubris where people don't ever really look at the numbers. It's just like, it's in a funny way, they go on gut more than a small company. Because in a small company, I mean, the numbers are always right in front of you, because you're always like, it's a razor thin edge between we're working it out or holy crap, we're going bankrupt. So I think just having that headspace or that attitude of, we never really know and we can always know more, is probably a really good one. And then my second one is likely psychology, because it's if you think of it even just from like an empathy side of things, if you're trying to imagine what is it that my visitor is going through, like Brian and I have had like lots of experience in web development, and the amount of tone deaf web pages that are out there is staggering. And if anybody just took a moment to say, even if they looked at their logs, what do people click on? They get a sense of what do people want. And, again, it's not pandering. It's just giving people what they want helps you. There's like a Venn diagram overlap of, here's what I would like you to see, and here's what you're wanting to see. The more that I can match in that space, that's going to be a great experience for you and a great experience for me. Which again, it could come back to, you could mathematically model that and see it. So I will pick 2 out of the 3. I'll cheat.
Good examples, and I've got so many more questions, but we have to wrap up this episode. We might have to have
you do part 2.
Yeah, we'd have to do a part 2. One thing you made me think of there is you referenced, checking in with what people want and figuring that out and giving it to them. Seems basic, seems simple. And I think most B2B marketers will cite examples like, there was somebody at Google back in the day whose job it was just to keep that homepage blank, and just the one thing is give people what they want. And then the next person will say, yeah, and Amazon became Amazon because they eliminated friction from every step of their journey. They gave people what they want. And we will all nod. And then we'll go into a boardroom together and design something completely different that doesn't do any of those things. So that's unusual. And we'll have to explore that part of marketing psychology in our next episode. But I want to share 2 quick anecdotes to wrap up that you've reminded me of in our time together. one of them is you referenced early on that you perceive, especially if you appreciate psychology and humans, you perceive people who come to your website as visitors, not traffic. And I can remember when you crystallized that for the team at Cognos, you said, and I can't remember what the number was, but I'll say 3,500. If you had 3,500 people a day walking into your lobby, looking around, trying to talk to you, would you get coffee? Would you get some donuts? Would you arrange to greet them? And I could see everybody in the room's eyes light up. I thought, oh yeah, maybe we're thinking about this website thing the wrong way. It's not just us pounding our chests talking about how great we are. We actually have to receive visitors and treat them like visitors. I mean, Walmart figured it out. They've got greeters at the front door. That was one anecdote that you reminded me of. And the second one was you referenced one of my favorite types of web technology, which is a heat map. And the first time we got our hands on one of those at Cognos, I remember we had the whole team organized with a heat map to go in and deal with a very contentious, very expert, but very contentious subject matter expert after we'd written these beautiful and designed these beautiful web pages. And we knew the contentious product expert was going to cut them to ribbons in the review because that's what he tended to do. And so we came ready for war, and we sat around the boardroom table, we marshaled all of our arguments, and we brought in the contentious subject matter expert, and we turned on the heat map, which most people hadn't seen at that stage. And we told him what it was, and it showed where people were clicking. And then he said, oh, I see what you're talking about. Yeah, go ahead and do exactly what you want to do. And it was the most anticlimactic meeting we'd ever had. We all looked at each other. We couldn't get out of the room fast enough because of the scope of the win by using the data to support that. So you reminded me of both those anecdotes today. So we've had some good times together. I really appreciate you sharing these concepts and this article with us. I encourage everybody to have a look at it. Any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
No, I mean, this has been fun. I think what you remind me is, I mean, I'll go back to the lesson to my poor kids when they're 7 in the car. It's the unobserved life. Like, you really have to take a step back often and ask yourself, like, what am I doing here? Why am I doing it? And a lot of really, great marketing comes out of that. We do get stuck in ruts, and we do get stuck against deadlines where we just go off and do things. But when you really stop and really try to think through what am I about, like the one that you referenced, like I think out of that we came up with the concept, right, of I am the ombudsperson for the web visitor. So I need, and there's a couple of things with that. Like, I need to represent their needs, but I also need to represent their value back to the organization. Like that, to your point, because we were in the early days of web marketing, and we used to say like web visitors were hippies and Birkenstocks. Like, people didn't really have any respect for them. Real people came to my event in Vegas, but it's like no, they're real humans, and that was our job, was to make sure that they had a voice at the corporate table, and their value was respected, that they could bring to us.
All right. Well, John, thank you very much for your time. It was great to meet you. I still can't believe we're in the same city, same
I know,
industry, same everything, and we've never met. But I'm glad. Yeah. I'm glad this came together and we got to meet. And to our listeners, welcome to B2B Marketing Pint, as this is our first episode. We hope you enjoyed it. Remember to like, share, and do all those fun stuff with it. Don't forget to subscribe. And we look forward to our next guest and more episodes like this in the future. So thanks, John, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Cheers. Hey, folks, if you liked that episode, you won't believe the next one.
So don't forget to subscribe on your favorite platform and you won't miss out.
Or if you've got an idea we haven't thought of yet, hit us up in the comments. We'll cover that too.